reboot. To be completely cleaned out, and we forgot everything we ever learned from the time that we were Rechama'im, the Tisha Chadoshim Favos. Because in America, they have to keep the space empty so reinkommen. Neue Teire, neue Chedushim, but alles vergessen. Now, so let me refresh. Okay, I'm not giving long speeches. I'm really expecting you mitzahalten. In other words, that you didn't forget. At least you didn't forget so much that a brief refresher is not going to be enough. There is a shita in Kabbalah that says that Ein Seif is Pasha B'tachas Apshitas. Right? The shita in Kabbalah is Pasha B'tachas Apshitas. What about the idea that Sfiris and Ein Seif? This shita in Kabbalah says Sfiris and Ein Seif come from Kelim. The Sfiris are part, the Oid is Pashut. The Keli gives it a color, like Mayim B'klei Meguvan, water in a colored glass. The water is clear. The color comes from the glass alone. Slightly differently, or maybe a little bit of a higher level, the spheres come from the Tzimtzum Rishon. But Ein Seif is Pasha B'tachas Apshitas. Okay? If you go in this shita, you don't really have a kasha. How do spheres exist lifnei atzimtzum? Even though we do speak about Eses Spheres Agnuzis lifnei atzimtzum, and then higher that we speak about spheres in case lifnei atzimtzum, but you go in this shita, Eses Spheres Agnuzis lifnei atzimtzum is not in the Ein Seif, it's in the Kelim. Spheres in case is not in the Ein Seif, it's in the Kelim. But the Ein Seif is Pasha B'tachas Apshitas. Simple. The whole idea that it has spheres has to do with things outside of it. The Tzimtzum Rishon came by itself with Pasha B'tachas Apshitas. If you go in that model, there's a lot of kashas on that model. But the ultimate kash on that model is that according to this shita, oir be'etzem is igulim. Which means oir by itself doesn't go into kelim. Oir by itself is Ein Seif. It's like Sevev Kolal. And the whole idea that air goes into kelim is because something outside of air is, so to speak, forcing the air to go into the kelim. So in this shita, oir pnimi is not really so pnimi. It's not so pnimi. Why? Because the air really is not pnimi. The oir is being pnimiized by something outside of oir. Yes? Then comes Hamshchaim Beis. And from the very beginning, in the very first Maim, it was in the Machon, and the second Maim was in the Nimshal, and the Rebbe Rashab changes his mind. And he slugs that the whole Chassidus is still Yayin Beis Namachaya. And he says, no, there's such a thing as Esesphiris and Eir. The Lasha the Maim brings us Pnimi and Yetz. There's such a thing as Esesphiris and Eir. And Esesphiris and Eir does not begin with Caleb. Esesphiris and Eir does not begin with Tzimtzum. Esesphiris and Eir begins with Eir. From their Madrega, where you could say Oir, which is the highest Madrega of Ein Seif Shlefnei HaTzimtzum, there's an Inyan of Sfiris. Why? When in doubt, say Kavona. Why does the Ayin Beis change and say that the idea that Oir Ein Seif has Sfiris is not an effect of something outside of the Ein Seif, like Kalim or like Tzimtzum, but it's the Ein Seif by the Eibishter's own will, because the Eibishter wants Oir Pnimi. It's very consistent with Dira B'Tachtonim. It's just Dira B'Tachtonim in the signal of Ein Seif, not the signal of doing a mitzvah. The Eibishter created the world for godliness to be revealed in the world, not for godliness to be mevatel the world, to make the world ois world, which is what the other shita would hold, what I called at the beginning of the year, based on a maimah that I saw once, Toyu Shabbatikon, which Tikkun Shabbatikon. The Eibishter's kavanah, there should be a world. There should be a person. And you should be Eimer Lalamda. You should stand your ground. The Lakus should not break you and be mevatel you. And the Oir should be revealed to you. So from Atzmos, at least from the Madreg of Atzmos of Eir, the idea that Oir is meant to go into Keli begins. And therefore, there's Esesphiris and Ein Seif Lifnei HaTzimtzum as well. Esesphiris, the idea of Sphiris and Oir does not begin with Tzimtzum Rishon or with Caleb, it begins with the Atzmos. From Atzmos, Esesphiris and Oir. There's three Madregas of Ein Seif Lifnei HaTzimtzum, besides for Yecheles. The Machon of Esesphiris Agnuzis, the Machon of Sphiris and Kates, and the idea of Etzem of Ein Seif. On all three levels, there's an aspect of Ein Seif, which is the Inyan of Eser. Eser v'lei Teisha, Eser v'lei Achados, 10. This is what we were learning, okay? Then came a Mashmo's Dershin. Mashmo's Dershin Ika B'nai, a very big Chiddush. That is a Mashmos in its Chaim. It's Mashma in Arizal. Mashmos. What was the Mashmos? That if you go in this Shita, Tzimtzum Arishin does not have to be Siluk. When it comes to the Esesfiris, in oil, Tzimtzum Arishin can be only Mir. Like there's a bunch of reasons why it has to be Siluk anyway. But the Rebbe comes up with this Higoyin, this Lamdis, that according to the Shita, the Esesfiris and Eir exist Lifnei HaTzimtzum. In as much as the Esesfiris are concerned, it's possible that the Eir Seif should be not what we call in this moment Hischachus, Yesh Me'ayif Lifnei HaTzimtzum, but Gilead Helef Lifnei HaTzimtzum. Esesfiris exist Lifnei HaTzimtzum, Esesfiris exist after the Tzimtzum, and they're close, they're not far, they're close. Mashmos, mashma. The next to my bottom goes to this mashmos of that Arizal. The Rebbe Rashab and the words of that Arizal. So I just told you two things. One thing and a second thing. The first thing that I told you is that according to the Shita of Ayin Beis, there's Esesfiris Lifnei HaTzimtzum. There's Esesfiris not only Lifnei HaTzimtzum, there's Esesfiris Lifnei HaRotzen. There's not only Esesfiris Lifnei HaLeis HaRotzen, there's Esesfiris Lifnei HaLeis HaGilui. Esesfiris Madreg of Erin Seif on the level of Etzem. Why? When in doubt, say Kavana. The Kavana is Gilui. That's number one. And then there's a number two. What's the number two? The number two is that the Esesfiris after the Tzimtzum come from Esesfiris Lifnei HaTzimtzum in a way that they're close, not Yesh Me'ayin. It's a moidenik Chiddush. That there's such a metzias of Esesfiris of Lifnei HaTzimtzum. And when I say such a metzias, I mean that the idea that the Esesfiris are Esed and not Pshitus is so real that the Esesfiris after the Tzimtzum, which is for sure Esesfiris, comes Esesfiris Lifnei HaTzimtzum, which is bittul in a way that it's only Gilead. Okay?
That's
two.
Close.
That makes it called, it's called Gilead and Kira. The opposite of that is called Hischachus. Hischachus is like Yesh Me'ayin. 2 points. That is Esesfiris of the Tzimtzum, and that there is a closeness between Esesfiris Lifnei HaTzimtzum and Esesfiris Lachar HaTzimtzum. So the Rebbe Rashab came up with an impossible kasha, which is a perikit, an impossible kasha. How could something be a metzias and be totally bottled at the same time? If you say that Esesfiris Lifnei HaTzimtzum, the loya idela. Moreover, you say that Esesfiris Lifnei HaTzimtzum are so close to Esesfiris Lachar HaTzimtzum that you can call them Gilu Helam. You can call them Kidav as opposed to Ischachas and Yesh Me'ayin. Yeah? So how do Esesfiris look Lifnei HaTzimtzum? In what way are they Esed? And in what way are they bottled? This is a very important kasha. Because you got to speak out of two sides of your mouth. On the one hand, you have to establish how Lifnei HaTzimtzum and Esesfiris are completely bottled. On the other hand, the Esesfiris of Lifnei HaTzimtzum are not completely bottled. Or to use a very important Brooklyn expression, befedish, not bottled. Why? Because the Esesfiris are bottled and they're not Esesfiris. If they're not Esesfiris, then the Esesfiris Achar HaTzimtzum are not close to Esesfiris Lifnei HaTzimtzum, and they have to happen with Derech Eschachus, not like the Mashmos of the Arizal that there's a Yifin Gilead Helma Eschachus. And that's what Perikit is asking, a very stark kasha. This is a chazor of what I said before Pesach. And I hope it's not Chedushim, I hope it's just a chazor. It's a ches, chazor, the shtev is ches. Chedushim and shtev is ches. Yeah, the problem with the ches is, there's no bittul, there's no little space between the two parts of the dalad and the hay, like it says in the Maimorim of matzah and chometz. Matzah with the hay, chometz with the ches. So Chiddush and chazor gets very, very confused. A minute. What was the tenets? Yeah, very interesting tenets. Basically, the tenets is that the Sfiris of Lifnei HaTzimtzum are completely bottled. But they're not completely bottled in the sense that they're not there. They're completely bottled in the sense that even though they're there, you don't see them. When I gave you the classes before Pesach, I introduced you to the idea of a head at Tfisas Mokum. That's how I. The Rebbe doesn't say it in the Maimon. I said it. What's head at Tfisas Mokum? You have a very, very high bittul, and the bittul is outside of you. There's a very, very simple Gashmi's Machon for the bittul head that faces Machon, and that's the bittul of Shrage B'tira. If you walk outside on a sunny day with a candle, that candle is adding no light to the sun's light. Does that mean the candle isn't there? Of course it's there, right? You have to say again, the Lashon Amzu, Befedish is there, yeah? And at the same time, it's adding no light, because next to the light of the sun, it's makes of nothing. So you have an ironic thing over here. The candle is so bottled that it gives nothing, but the way the candle is bottled is not that it gets lost in the higher source. It's just because of the higher source, you don't see it. You take away the higher source, and it's been there the whole time.
So the yesh is still there? Like the thing
We can't use the word yesh. You can use the word metzias. The metzias never went away. Not of a den next to the Eir HaShemesh, the metzias is not at all seen. But not the metzias and not all the thing, because the metzias has been broken. Because the metzias have been included in the source. It's overwhelmed by the source. You take away the source, it's been there the whole time. This is how I explained it to you and how it's explained in many Chassidus. It's called the bittul of Ukam. Keser Elyon, Afagadu, Iu, Eretzach, Ur Metzuchzach. Ukam hu kadem ilos ilos. That expression, ukam means I'm black next to you. You go away, I become light. You're around, I become black. But when you're around and I become black, it doesn't mean that I'm included in you. It means I'm overwhelmed by you. Or the mashal, which is brought to the Maimarim, ois shalom b'mereima. All these mashalim speak to the same thing. You have a malach named Machon. You have a malach named Gabriel. What they have in common, Sai Machon, Sai Gabriel. You have a malach named Machon. You have a malach named Gabriel. What Machon and Gabriel have in common is what? It says an Beidinish mention. It's a Beidinish mention. Machon is chesed, doesn't want to hear about Gvura. Gabriel's Gvura is about chesed. Finish, talk to the walls. There's no such thing as escalalus. By people, I mentioned escalalus. So Machon and Gabriel are diametrical opposites. Machon is only chesed, there's no Gvura at all. Gabriel is only Gvura. But they're standing in front of the Eibishter. When you're standing in front of the Eibishter, down, they get along. They're even civil to each other. They're nice. Shalom Aleichem, Basmachs to Machol. I hate you, shit as mavis, but let's make believe we're friends. Why? Because they're bottled in the presence of the Eibishter. But the buzzing doesn't make that Chesed isn't Chesed and Gvura isn't Gvura. It means that the spastus of Chesed is not there. You take away the Oisa Shalom and they're both back, and Machol and Gabriel are L'Ktsovis. They're polar opposites. This is how I explained it to you from, I guess, Mother Maimonim here. The Rebbe said a little bit of a different word, and again, is that I yet and why the Rebbe brings this singing and not the other singing. The Rebbe Rashab says a shtickle chiddush. There's a few vert of the Rebbe Rashab, and one of the most important vert is that anything which is in a state of beli gavul is also in a state of beli mitzias. If you have chesed, and the chesed is infinite, then it can't be chesed. If you have gvura, and the gvura is infinite, they can't be gvura, because even though it's midas chesed has to be a mitzias, and to be a mitzias it has to be limited. So if chesed is in a way of bli gvul, automatically it's chesed, but it doesn't have the mitzias of chesed. And al derech zeh gvura, if the gvura is bli gvul, it's taka gvura, but it doesn't have the mitzias of gvura. Therefore, the Rebbe says, lifnei atzimtzum, you have chesed, and you have gvura, and you have chochmah, and you have bina, you have netzach, and you have hoid, and on the one hand they're befedish 10. What's the idea of Finish 10? That after the Tzimtzum, the 10 emerge in a way of Kiruv, Gileahel, and Besaras Chachas. They're close. The Asesphiras after the Tzimtzum are close. We have to start early because there's a Fabrengen. Okay, we have to finish around 9 o'clock, okay? I'm sorry. I tried to reach everybody, yeah? Hello? You with me? You with me? Yeah? Since as the spheres after the tzimtzum are close to the spheres lifting at tzimtzum, so as the spheres lifting at tzimtzum have to be b'mitzias, and yet lifting at tzimtzum they have no mitzias at all because they're infinite. An infinite midah is not a midah. So infinite chesed, infinite gvura should be a bigger conflict than finite chesed and finite gvura, but they're just not. Why not? Because the infinite chesed is not showing its chesedism. It's built in Matthias. Infinite Gvura, the showing its Gvuraism, and therefore they can cohabit. They can live together. They can be in one place. So this becomes the Rebbe's answer to a very complicated question. Okay. To repeat the question again, bekitzer, the kasha is: if you hold that lifnei atzimtzum is esesfiris, moreover, you hold that the esesfiris lifnei atzimtzum and the esesfiris lach atzimtzum are so close to each other that you don't have to have siluk. It's not b'derech eschachos. It's b'derech gilui helam. Esesfiris after the tzimtzum are pashut revealing what the esesfiris were lifnei atzimtzum, and it's not like yesh me'ayin. So you have to explain two things: A, how the esesfiris lifnei atzimtzum are bottled, and B, how the esesfiris lifnei atzimtzum are not bottled. Because if they're truly bottled, the way the esesfiris, which are totally bottled, are going to become a matthias after the tzimtzum, has to be eschachos, be like yesh me'ayin, not gilui. This was the question. And the Rebbe gave an answer. The answer that the Rebbe gave, that since the spheres in a state of belief of all, they're not the Matthias and they can contradict each other. This is more or less a chazara of what we learned before Pesach. Now, I told you then, and this is very, very true and important. I actually took out the Eretera, I looked it up. The Eretera, which is Mitzayin, in footnote 28. And I maybe even have it here. No, I don't. I copied the 3 pages of Eretera. It's only 3 pages of the Maimer. The Maimer is like 10 pages long that are from this Maimer. And you see how little there is in the original. If you guys learn Perikutes, more than half the Perik is parentheses. The rest of it is in Tzemach Tzedek. He's quoting Tzemach Tzedek's words, but there's so many Hagos from the Rebbe Rashab, it's almost like Panim Chadash's Beis Rivka. In what we're going to learn now, you have the whole paragraph, the bottom of Mem, and the top of Mem, the whole paragraph is in the Segrayim. In other words, it's a Tzedek Sugi V'rei Nesanishma V'shem Nesanira, which is tonight's topic. It's 2 lines. The rest of it, the Rebbe Rashab is adding. And if you look in the original, you'll see that that's how it is. Now, if one of you doesn't have those pages, I want me to send them to you if I can find them on my phone, which I don't know if I can, because it's been 4 weeks. I'll be happy to send them to you. Does anybody want to speak? Go ahead.
You said that one time if they're bottled beforehand, then how are they not bottled afterwards?
No. If they're bottled beforehand, how are they afterwards? Gili ahelim lagabi lifnei tzimtzum. There should be yesh me'ayin. It should be eschachos.
Because
They're so far apart.
Because they're saying that if they're bottled beforehand, it's called they're limited.
No, they don't have Matthias. Bottled means they don't exist.
So it's 10 infinite things?
Yeah.
But what does infinite mean if it's just 10 of them?
Okay. That's the kasha. Chavechet kashas. This is what we learned. So what's the Rebbe doing? The Rebbe Rashab is arguing Ayin Beis. That's what he's doing. He came up with a new sheet in Kabbalah, and he's defending it. The new sheet in Kabbalah says, and I'm using my own words now, that the Kavanah Sabriya involves something called Gilui of Eir Pnimi, that urge to go into a keli, not Eir in Sefer Seva Klam, which is going to burn the world up because it's so strong, but the urge to go into a keli that kills and be able to hold it and receive it. And that's part of the Kavanah. And this is part of the Kavanah, it goes to Atzmus. And if it's part of the Kavanah, it goes to Atzmus, Lifnei Atzimtzum, the idea of Eir Pnimi already exists. So Lifnei Atzimtzum, you already have the idea of Eir Pnimi. You already have the idea of Eir Seif, of Esesfiris. 10 colors. And the Rebbe Rashab explains how on the one hand it exists, because Lagabi L'achar Atzimtzum is Gili Helim, and the other hand doesn't exist at all, because Lifnei Atzimtzum, everything is bottled. And he worked it out. Okay? But then the Tzemach Tzedek brings the Dugma. The whole Dugma is 2 lines. The last 2 lines are the middle paragraph of page mem. And the whole next paragraph is the Rebbe Rashab eating himself up about the Tzemach Tzedek's Dugma. Tzemach Tzedek is a Dugma. I want to give you a mashal to what I just said. When the Eibishter gave us the Torah, when the Eibishter gave us the Torah, there was a revelation of godliness above Ishtalshus. And what is above Ishtalshus? U'benefesh. And in Avedis Adam, it's Inyan, Agili, Akechetz, Atzmi, to reveal the Koiches, the Madreg of Etzem, as the spheres which make of Etzem. And Lamaila, it's called Keches HaKlulim Benefesh, right? Kela, not Noisei. Hayurei nes hanishma v'shem nes hanir. Because lifnei atzimtzum, the essence was completely bottled. Because lifnei atzimtzum, the 5 chushim reish me'atam reich and completely bottled. So the wires got crossed. Where there's a gili of it, safe lifnei atzimtzum, what is normally heard can be seen. What is normally seen is heard. Because there is no real separation between Re'i and Shmiya. Seeing is one faculty and it's in the eyes. And it sees physical things. Hearing is another faculty and it's in the ears. And you hear spiritual things. The way seeing and hearing are manifest, what you see you cannot hear, and what you hear you cannot see, they're two separate koiches. At the moment of Har-Sinai, since there was a really of Atmos, and Atmos means the madreg of Eses, Firis, and the madreg of Etzem, so the wires got crossed. What you normally could only see, you could hear, and what you could normally only hear, you could see. Now we have to go with the great and radical assumption that you've already learned these 2 lines. And I'm not the first time you're hearing them because you've been sitting on this mind for a parvach. That's a Machon. Okay? Let's talk. Let's repeat again. What's the point of this mind? The point of this Maimon is to explain to us, at least as Perikites, how on the one hand, Lifnei Tzimtzum as the spheres are totally bottled. On the other hand, as the spheres Lifnei Tzimtzum have to have enough of a Matthias that Legabil Achar Tzimtzum they're going to be Kiruv and Gilia Hel, not Yesh Me'ayin. And those 2 things are opposites. Are you bottled completely or you're not bottled completely? And for the Gemara, both together. You're completely bottled and you're completely a Matthias. You're completely bottled because Bli Gavul has no Tzir, and you're completely a Matthias because even though you have no Matthias, you're only Chesed. Even though you have no Matthias, you have only Gvura. This is what the Maimer said. Yes, right? And the Mashal for this is that normally you can see with your eyes. Normally you can hear with your ears. And only. When does the revelation of the power to see from the Madreg of Etzem Lifnei Tzimtzum? When does the revelation of the power to hear from the Madreg of Etzem Lifnei Tzimtzum? So the wires get crossed, and what you can normally see, you can hear, and what you normally hear, you can see. This is what the Rebbe says. What do you think?
What are you talking about if it's not a Matthias? What are you referring to? You're saying it's Chesed, that's Matthias. What do you mean that Chesed isn't a Matthias? It's Chesed.
But it's Bli Gvul. So Chesed Bli Gavul is a theoretical idea, it's not an actual idea. Gevura, which is Bli Gavul, is a theoretical idea. So in the Bli Gavul state of Chesed, in the Bli Gavul state of Gevura, they're very strong Matthias, but they're beheaded on Matthias. It's not right. If it's not a Matthias, it's not a contradiction to another Matthias.
How are they actually able to hear that, whatever, the thunder, if it's, and that's making that
They
Matthias?
can see the thunder, and they can hear the lights.
So how do they see that? That's making, is not a Matthias, that's called...
So now, let's do math, okay? Let's do math. The truth of the matter is, when people teach Chassidus, by definition, they're beating around the bush. Beating around the bush is a shema mushal for a hakanah chaynik, you know. A yidit migizok. If you went over to the Abdis, the Mismas Agot will be a big chassid, and you asked him a question in a mind. It didn't matter what mind it was, didn't matter what question it was. Before you finished the question, he already told you the answer. Esvenzach b'meret. Rabbi Yisrael told me. He never even listened. Esvenzach b'meret. In other words, I'm not answering you. So it depends on the case. Esvenzach b'meret. When you learn Chassidus, it's Yidiyas HaMatziyas, you don't really understand. So you're always talking around. When you learn Nigli, you can push it understand this fun. And Chassidus to understand the Etzem Minyan is very, very unusual, very hard. So as a teacher, and as a Loimed of Chassidus, whenever you learn a Maimed, and this is the truth of the matter is it applies to Shas, to everything you're going to learn, is before you start asking yourself what's written here, you put bookends on it. What's not written here? When a Maimed talks about an Inyan in Chassidus, you're not sure what level it is, and you're not sure how to understand it. First thing you do is eliminate what it's for sure not. And once you eliminate, but for sure not, you have a smaller space inside the Ishtalshalos. And that alone brings you a big step closer to understanding the Higoyin Shebedov. You understand what I'm saying? You understand what I'm saying? You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. So now, by heart, seen it was a bigness. That what is normally heard was seen. What's normally seen is heard. Where did the ness come from? The answer to the question is like all other questions. It came from Hashem. It came from Hashem. It ain't made a ness. But this is fancy schmancy Kabbalah. So everything is put into Hishtalshus, into Madregas. He says, this ness, the Teroyin Asanishma, Shem Asanida, it came from Esesfiras Agnuzah Kedim Tzimtzum. That's where it comes from. After Tzimtzum, Esesfiras are divided up. Chesed is not Gvura. Gvura is not Chesed. Kedim Tzimtzum, we talk out of both sides of our mouth. A, Chesed is totally bottled. Gvura is totally bottled. Or B'meila, that can be in the same space. B, it's Befedish Chesed. Befedish Gvura. V'haraya, when it's going to come from Lifnei HaTzimtzum to La'achar HaTzimtzum, it's not going to come B'derech Eschachos, it's going to come Derech Kiruv, Gil Yahel. Correct? Correct. So the Rebbe Rashab, and this is the Tzemach Tzedek's words, these two lines are the Tzemach Tzedek's words, the rest of it's the Rebbe Rashab, is saying a gewaldige Chiddush, which he doesn't have to say. Now he's saying this Chiddush because he's hoping it'll help us understand this sugya of how there could be essence spheres lifnei hatzimtzum that A, don't exist at all, and B, exist absolutely. So what's his mashal? Reinas anishma shemes anida. But what's the chiddush? What's the Rebbe Tzedek saying here? What's the big idea in these two lines? That this ness, that Yidden could see what is normally heard, and Yidden could hear what's normally seen, comes from the shoyresh of re'iyah and shmiyah and not higher. Have you ever heard of the Eibishter? Every Chabad Chosser has to ask himself that question, everybody. Have you ever heard of the Eibishter? Let's bring Eibishter Lied. Das ist ein ganz Tag und ein ganz... Aus der Morgenheit von dem Eibishter. Der Eibishter von einem kleinen Kind. Yeah? Does the Eibishter have eyes? Haneta Eisen Aliyishma. You said, yeah, but I don't remember Baruch Nafshi. Yeah? Hashem doesn't have eyes. Hashem doesn't have ears. There's no koiches. There's no hearing. There's no seeing. There's Peter's absence. So if the Eibishter has no seeing and the Eibishter has no hearing, so when it comes into hearing and seeing, for him, it's no big deal. He comes from a place where there is no hearing. He comes from a place where there is no seeing, so he crosses the wires. But the Tzemach Tzedek says, no. You should know. The idea that Yidden saw what is normally heard comes from the shadish of seeing, not higher than the shadish of seeing. You should know that the idea that Yidden heard what is normally seen comes from the shadish of hearing, not higher. Now, what's bothering the Tzemach Tzedek? What would he care if he said, the Eibishter made a nest, Atzmos hat gemacht a nest, No. The Eibishter has a source for seeing Lifnei HaTzimtzum. The Eibishter has a source for hearing Lifnei HaTzimtzum according to Drush Zed. This is the Maimon in the Chaim Beis. And the Tzemach Tzedek writes in his Maimon also, Bereva Drushim, in most Maimorim you don't have this, but Lefi Drush Zed, Tzemach Tzedek writes, according to this Maimon, that the Sfiris of Lifnei HaTzimtzum, Lifnei HaTzimtzum to the concept of Hashem seeing distinctly. Lifnei HaTzimtzum to the concept of Hashem hearing distinctly. And yet, Lifnei HaTzimtzum, the seeing isn't seeing, and the hearing isn't hearing, because it's bottled. So is it or is it not? And the answer is, you're right. I don't understand. Is it or is it not? You're right. But right what? Beide Sachen sind in Emes. So the Tzemach Tzedek is mechadish a greisa chiddush. That seeing what is normally heard is not coming from higher than Ke'ech Hariyah. It's coming only from Sheidish Hariyah. Hearing what is normally seen is not coming from higher than Ke'ech Hashmiyah. It's coming only from the Sheidish Hashmiyah, which is not a Metzias.
Which if you said it came from the Eibishter himself, then you would... Then
you have no kasha.
You know the source, Ladaf...
Eibishter can yochel whatever he wants.
And then you don't say that the source of hearing is...
That's right.
Is for,
No. We're not talking about the Maimon. We're talking about the Machon. The Tzemach Tzedek is trying to explain this duality, this contradiction, this dichotomy. A, Lifnei HaTzimtzum spheres are totally bottled. B, Lifnei HaTzimtzum spheres are fellowship Metzias. And he gives a dogma for Reimas Nish Shemes Anira. Reimas and Nishma Shemes Anira don't happen Lifnei HaTzimtzum. They happen in El Mazar Ashma Chumri, to physical people. So what's the corollary? That because lifnei tzimtzum ri'i is bligvul. Because lifnei tzimtzum shmi is bligvul. So they're both in the same space. They don't contradict one another. Because they don't contradict one another, they work together. But as normally seen is heard, what's normally heard is seen. What would happen if the Tzemach Tzedek would say that Eibishter made a ness? Eibishter Akel Yachal made a ness. What would happen if he would say that? He wouldn't have a raya l'niden. He wouldn't be able to explain the Bible. The Tzemach Tzedek's not playing games. Tzemach Tzedek halta. Tzemach Tzedek holds that the power to see what is normally here is coming from the Keach HaRi'iyah Lifnei HaTzimtzum and not higher. The power to hear what is normally seen is coming from the Keach HaShmiya Lifnei HaTzimtzum and not higher. But this is so problematic. How does the Rebbe begin the next paragraph? He begins the next paragraph with a klotz kasha. When you say that Lifnei HaTzimtzum is the inyan of seeing, but it's bottle, and when you say lifnei tzimtzum is the inyan of hearing, but it's bottle, that's not the same thing as saying that because hearing is bottle, you can hear what's seen. That's not the same thing as saying that if hearing lifnei tzimtzum is so you can see what's heard. The Rebbe is saying that the koiches are bottle. The rayim as anish the koiches become opposites. It's not a raya, it's not a marshal inyan, it's a much deeper inyan. The Rebbe says, wait a minute, I don't understand what you're talking about. We're saying that lifnei tzimtzum, the sefiras exists, the sefiras are bottle. I got that. But you're saying that because lifnei tzimtzum, the sefiras exists, the sefiras are bottle, each sefira can do what the opposite sefira does. That's a whole other kettle of fish. How'd that happen? So the Tzemach Tzedek says two lines, and the Rebbe Rashab jumps on him. Look at the beginning. Says, Rebbe, I don't understand you, Rebbe. If I stayed in this Zayde. Tzemach Tzedek was the Rebbe Rashab Zayde. At him gave Mayad, he took his hand, he put it in his beard, he gave him Mayad and Kabbalah. At him gekent, the Rebbe Rashab. Zayd, I don't understand you. Zeu Yeser bebechiris achtos v'sarvus hanau. The idea of ta'aruvus, right? That they're all living together, but they're not really getting along. Because each one's so matias, like we explained by Arichas L'fnei HaPesach. We spoke about this in, I think, 3 or 4 shiurim. We're going so slowly, we're almost moving backwards. On the one hand, it's totally bottle, on the other hand, it's the matias. But this is not that. Shari kol keach peil pu'ula hafchis. We simply said that the keach hariyah doesn't see. We simply said the keach hashmiya doesn't hear. Now we're saying the keach hariyah hears. Keach hashmiya sees. Wow! That doesn't say before. So the Rebbe Rashab jumps on his Zayde. He pounces on the Tzemach Tzedek and says, Zayde, ich verstehe nicht. Tzemach Tzedek gives you 2 lines and 3 words. If you want to count b'matan te'ez rash tevis, it gives you 2 lines and 4 words. That's it. If you look at the original, it's word for word, I think. In the mind of Tzemach Tzedek in the Te'er. So it's the Rebbe Rashab gets nervous. Was ist getan da Zayde? How is Reinas and Nishma, Shemes and Nira parallel? So the idea that you have essence spheres of Nea Tzimtzum that are A, totally bottle, and B, totally Metzias, because we're saying not that the Metzias of spheres is totally bottle, we're saying that each sphere tolerates the opposite. Those are not the same things. So the Rebbe Rashab starts a pilpul. And the pilpul takes a page. He's analyzing the Tzemach Tzedek's words. Or to say it in other words, why the Tzemach Tzedek says what he says, I get. Tzemach Tzedek says what he gets because he wants to explain how A, lifnei tzimtzum, there's Metzias, and B, the rules of Metzias are broken down because there's totally both. But what the Tzemach Tzedek says doesn't make any sense. It's not the same thing as the spheres that are bottle of Nea Tzimtzum. It's a whole nother thing. So I want to tell you what happens. In this paragraph, this one, Ulach Oira, there's a tenet, it starts here. There's a kasha, and 4 lines down is a tenet for Yesh Leimar. Second line from the bottom, when we call Mekim Kasha Leimar, he asks the kasha again. And on page Mem Aleph, if you look at the line where it says Hine b'makamacha, and in number 35, he attempts to answer the question a second time. Kasha teretz, kasha teretz. But then the word Omnam Yesh Leimar, 5 lines from the end of the paragraph, 6 lines. At the end of the line, Omnam Yeshem Yishalafi, you see that? Omnam Yeshem Yishalafi, the Rebbe Rashab says, it comes from Atzmas. It comes from higher than the Madrege where the Riyah and the Shmi are both. I'm not fully prepared yet to teach it all. I mean, we'll do it tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem. I don't want to spend more than one Mashiach on this. Believe me that whatever I do tomorrow, and next week we're starting Perikov. Believe that. I may not finish, it doesn't matter. The Tzemach Tzedek is bringing a comparison between Reinus and Ishmael, Shemer and Anida, and the way Siras Avot Lefnei Tzimtzum, and the Rebbe Rashab says it doesn't make any sense. Because we're saying that they're bottled. Tzemach Tzedek is saying that each one is doing the opposite midas, much more than bottled. He asks and he answers and he asks and he answers, and then he says, you know what? The idea of Reinus and Ishmael, Shemer and Anida come from Atzmas, which is taka higher than the Ishmael. You could say that he's disagreeing with the Tzemach Tzedek. Different Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek wants to say that the Reinus and Nishma, Shemus and Anida begins in the Madreg of Riyah and Shmiyah, not higher. The Riyah is totally bottled, so it could hear. The Shmiyah is totally bottled, so it could see. And then he says, "Wow." The Riyah is totally bottled, so you don't see. The Shmiyah is only but you don't hear, but you don't do the opposite. So he tries, first of all, to explain it. And then he says, Yashleima that the Atmos is his galus. Okay, now you go down a minor so you can go to the feminine.